the A-OK. There's the A-OK. Well, welcome e te whānau. Yes, this is the youth-led virtual political hot seat. Thank you so much for being here. You could have been anywhere, but you're not. You're here with us. It's going to be a great evening. So we are going to get started. My name is Dietrich. I am your MC, your Master of Ceremonies. Hey, my name is Dietrich Soakai. And before we go on any further, I'm going to just start us off with a bit of a karakia, and then from there we'll get into the evening. Awesome. Cool. Inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta. Kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu. Ti hei mauri ora. Awesome. I've always wanted to say that karakia, and stoked I got a chance to do it now. Awesome. So again, welcome, no mai, haere mai, to the youth-led virtual political hot seat. As I said earlier, my name is Dietrich Soakai. I'm your MC for this evening. A little bit about myself. I'm Tongan, Samoan, German, Irish, Scottish, English, and I'm probably related to everybody who's on this Zoom in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Probably because we're all human. Oh, yeah, so just a little love heart right there. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little rundown of how our evening is going to go. It'll be broken down into 3 rounds, and there'll be time limitations to keep the event moving. You know, because we got politicians in here. We know they like to talk, but also we appreciate what they say. So it'll be broken down into 3 rounds. Round 1, each young person will get to ask a question directed at 2 specific members of parliament, and each MP will have 2 minutes to answer. Then round 2 will be a quick fire question round, and each young person will ask a yes or no question. Yes, that is right. Yes or no is the answer. And that's it. And then round 3, 2 or 3 questions from the audience, depending on time. And it'll be up to 2 MPs can opt to answer. And then we'll have a closing round where each MP will have a minute, just a minute, to share their final thoughts, followed by each young person who'll also have a minute just to share their final thoughts, and then we'll close it off with a karakia. So that's sort of what you can expect from tonight's proceedings. But what we'll do is it'll be great to get to meet, it will give our participants a chance to introduce themselves. So we will start off with our awesome rangatahi, who are our rangatahi panelists. So we'll start off with Josiah.
Kia ora, my name is Josiah Tupai. I am full Samoan, and I am a youth MP for UNICEF Aotearoa.
Awesome. Welcome, Josiah, talofa lava. And we will now go to Quilla.
Kia ora, my name is Quilla Kittle-Smith. I live in Dunedin, and I'm representing Save the Children New Zealand.
Awesome. Kia ora, Quilla. And Ella?
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm from Auckland, and I'm representing the Ranger Advocacy Panel.
Awesome. Kia ora, Ella. Iona?
Kia ora, my name is Iona. I am in my 2nd year at the University of Waikato, and I'm also here with the Girl Guides, and I'm also James Shaw's Youth MP.
Kia ora, Iona. And Juanita?
Kia ora, my name's Juanita. I am here with Scouts Aotearoa. I am the National Diversity Inclusion Advisor for Cross-Cultural Capability.
Awesome, awesome. And that is our incredible rangatahi. Now, I don't know if we can do this on Zoom, but I think reactions are a good thing if that's a possible thing. So just even like a shaking of the hands, wiggling of your fingers, or some kind of emoji reaction. There it is. There's all the reactions happening at the bottom. That will be great. Show some love. Virtual love is good love. All right. We're now going to head over to our members of parliament to introduce themselves. So if we could start with Karen.
Kia ora, I'm Karen Short. I'm an activist MP and I'm based in Auckland on the North Shore when I'm not in Wellington. It's a real privilege to be here today and thank you for the invitation. I'm the spokesperson for children, child poverty, development, and Oranga Tamariki.
Oh, kia ora, Karen. And let's move over to Ricardo.
Kia ora, everybody. Ricardo here. I'm a Green List MP based in Tamaki-Makaurau. I'm originally from Mexico, first generation immigrant, and amongst many portfolios, I hold a social development and employment, immigration, senior citizens, and commerce and consumer affairs.
Oh, kia ora, Ricardo. And Arena.
Tēnā koutou. My name is Arena Williams. I'm the MP for Manurewa. I first got involved in politics when I was 15 years old, around the time where the Labour Party was undertaking a really public discussion around the foreshore and seabed. And as a young person, I saw the party that I had always supported and my parents had always supported and their parents before them doing something which I found really difficult to see. And I got involved with the MPs who were part of that discussion and part of shaping it at the table. It started as a volunteer and a flyer deliverer and got involved from there. And since then, I've been involved in student unions. I've been a student president at the Auckland University and was a lawyer, then acted as a lawyer for iwi before joining Parliament. I have a real interest in justice issues, particularly youth justice issues. But what I'm here to talk to you about tonight is I really get a lot out of you sharing with me your ideas. I think there's so much to be gained from youth participation in politics, whether it's young people learning more about voting and exercising their votes, whether it's leading movements for change like we've seen in climate change around the world, whether it's youth justice movements, whether it's young people putting their hands up to stand for Parliament. All of that I'm really supportive of and keen to hear from you.
Oh, kia ora, Arena. And last but not least, Matt.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Apologies for being a bit late. I just flew into Christchurch Airport, so I made a mad dash out here to Rangiora. So just to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues on the Zoom call tonight, all the young people and all the not so young people like myself. I'm the Member of Parliament for Waimakariri, which is in North Canterbury, a regional part of New Zealand. Interesting about Waimakariri, it's one of the fastest growing areas of New Zealand. It's a beautiful place. We've got miles of coastline up the east. We've got the hill country in the west, the Canterbury Plains in between. And what's quite unique about Waimakariri, we've got two braided rivers, the Ashley and the Waimakariri River as well. So a beautiful part of the country. If you haven't enjoyed it yet, please do come and visit and spend your money in the local economy. Before politics, I worked in the mental health field. I got into mental health as a career because of my own mental health issues. I went and sought help when I was young and thought, gee, I'd love to do that person's job. So I became a counsellor. That took me overseas to London, where I did a 15-year OE and worked for the British National Health Service in mental health. I came back in 2013 and was elected in 2014 into the National Party. I'm the spokesperson for mental health and suicide prevention. I'm also the spokesperson for youth, associate health and associate transport, because in the regions we like good motorways. And I'm looking forward to tonight. Look forward to it.
Kia ora, kia ora. E te iwi, all those watching far and wide, can we please show some reactions, some aroha to our MP panelists? That'd be choice. Awesome. Yes, seeing some love hearts and some nice emojis coming through. Receive that, fellow politicians, MPs. So good, so good. All right, so we are going to get into round one of our questions. So as I said, this is broken up into 3 rounds. This round, each young person will get to direct their question to 2 MPs. All MPs will be asked the question in that round, and the MPs have 2 minutes to answer their questions. No more than 2 minutes. We have a handy dandy timekeeper who will be ringing a bell, which you will hear at the 2-minute mark. If you continue to kōrero after that, I will not so awkwardly and politely try and bring that train home and bring it to a halt. Okay, so just so you know, that's kind of where that's at. Awesome. All righty. Cool. So let's get into it. So we'll have Josiah to ask his first question.
My first question is for Arena Williams and Ricardo Mendez March. Many kids attending schools in South Auckland are leaving around the year 12 and 13 mark to help their parents pay bills. How will we keep these kids in schools, and how will we help the parents to make ends meet?
And we'll direct that to you, Ricardo. If you could start us off, 2 minutes from when you start talking.
Yeah, kia ora for the, thank you so much for the question. And I think having worked in South Auckland before being an MP with Auckland Action Against Poverty, that was something I saw really often. And I think, you know, the truth is that we've got a housing sort of scenario where we've left far too much power for landlords and the private market to try and house everyone, and that's failed. And so the Greens have been pushing for solutions such as rent controls to ensure that people income catch up with the cost of rent, as well as continuing to push for things like lifting core benefits and ensuring that kids are not having to face that impossible decision of taking up full-time work just so that their whānau are looked after. I think there's also more work that we can do in terms of supporting families to have access to digital devices. And you know, one of the things that I worked a lot was around addressing the debt that families would be getting into just to afford devices for their children. And I think the support that work and income provides for things like devices should be coming as non-recoverable rather than putting families in debt, which means then they lose income. And so I think we can do far more work there to be supporting our youth to stay in school.
Nice. Okay, awesome. Man, Ricardo, I was waiting for that bell, but you're just such a pro. You got there before it even rang. So good. Thank you for that, Ricardo. Arena, we'll hand it over to you.
Tēnā koe, Josiah, and thank you for that question. It's something that is really difficult when you see whether it's teenagers, whether it's young people not in education or work and not with a pathway. And we've got this particular situation right now where because of COVID, because of a global pandemic, and because of the situation we're in South Auckland, I mean, we are this buffer zone around the airport. We have been hardest hit by COVID over and over and over again. And we now see that some families are in a position where young people feel like they need to get out there and work and bring an income in. And it's really hard to see. And as a local MP, I'm really engaged with that issue. But I don't want to take away from the really good work that's going on in the community by the schools and the NGOs already. Schools like Manariwa High School and James Cook High School, I think, have played an incredible leadership role over this COVID period by engaging with those kids who have fallen away from school, whether it's through traditional school and what looks like the classroom learning, or whether it's through alternative programs. I mean, Manariwa High School has an incredible dedication to getting kids into whatever it is they can excel at. As a teenager, I think that's so important that you have something to be really hopeful for about the future and hopeful for at school. And I see these high schools going above and beyond to find the things that kids are passionate about and do. Like Manariwa High School's driver's licensing program and tickets program that has got hundreds of kids over many years into not only driving work, but also into heavy machinery work. That's something that, you know, a lot of boys who are 17 and 18 are really passionate about, and it means they can go out and get a good high-paying wage as soon as they stick through school. But I think we need to do better at telling that story of being hopeful for the future and not responding to the need right now. That's why, you know, when you see the government responding with a cost of living package for families that are in need right now, the thinking is around, well, how do we get people through this temporary spot where things are really difficult and budgets aren't getting met? Because, you know, you can't squeeze people more and more and more and expect, you know, the teenagers to be able to keep focusing on their long-term goals, and parents to be able to keep working, and grandparents often in our South Auckland homes who also live in the homes. And that's what that thinking is about. But I also think there's a role for our NGOs and our community sector. You know, we have some incredible community groups that are working with kids who don't want to be at school and haven't had a good education system experience, and doing alternative things like getting into work and being supported to learn outside of the classroom, whether it's in our taiao and cleaning up the Puhinui stream. We have some incredible work going on there, whether it's in arts and culture and being able to be part of a creative community that's flourishing in South Auckland right now. Those are the kind of initiatives that I'm really glad to see in South Auckland and really supportive of.
Awesome. Kia ora. Thank you for that, Arena, and thank you for that, Ricardo, and malo Albito Josiah for that question. We're going to move into our next question, and I'll hand it over to Iona.
Kia ora. My question is that in the last 5 years, in the 5 years prior to 2019, debt to work and income tripled to $307 million. After uncovering these figures, Auckland Action Against Poverty has called for the wiping of the debt to work and income. Does your party agree with wiping the debt? And if so, is this a priority within your party? If not, what other actions would your party like to take to support those indebted to work and income instead? And that is to Karen Shaw and Matt Dosey.
Awesome. Let's start off with Karen.
Kia ora, Iona. Thank you for that question. Yes, I've looked into this issue a few times because I'm concerned that, you know, more than 15,000 New Zealanders, our most vulnerable New Zealanders, have been allowed to go into debt by over $20,000. And the problem with that is we're setting people up to fail. It's really hard to get out from underneath that kind of debt. And the highest amount owed to MSD is $893,000. And that's by one individual person, and that was because of fraud. But, you know, once you get into those kind of debts, that thinking that it's going to be paid back is not really realistic. And it holds people into the welfare system because they know they're never going to get out from underneath that debt. And while they're on welfare, the repayments are quite low. But once they go back to work, the repayments can end up being quite a bit higher. And it puts them in an uncomfortable position of having to choose to stay in poverty because they're in debt. ACT believes MSD has a responsibility to help the most vulnerable Kiwis, because we have a lot of children that rely on this as an income to put food on their plate and to have a warm, dry, healthy home. But we also believe that there should be a limit to the amount of debt that MSD is putting people under. And Kamau Sepuloni should really set a limit to that debt, to the amount that's loaned to them. And they should have the same kind of responsibility as lending companies and not putting people in so much debt they can never get out of it. But they also need to recognise when somebody's getting into trouble and give them the support networks to help them work themselves around that debt, where it comes to budgeting advice, where it comes to support from NGOs within the community, and actually wrap around some service before they get to that stage. But ACT also has a policy that when somebody has been on welfare for a very long time, or if they keep having more and more children on a benefit, being born into poverty, that we need to be making sure that the money's going where it needs to go. And so we actually have a policy around electronic welfare. You still get discretionary money put in your account to spend on what you want, but it also makes sure that the money is going to the children and that the money is going where it's intended to go if you are not able to manage it yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Karen. Very, very robust answer. Thank you. We'll pass it over to Matt.
Oh, thank you very much. Look, I agree with the sentiment of the question. I think we can't be setting people up for failure. And I suppose the National Party believes in, yes, welfare, but also workfare, to coin a phrase from the former British PM, Tony Blair. And clearly what we want is for people not to get in that position. We need to work harder, I think, as a country to understand how we get people off welfare into work. We have a very low unemployment rate at the moment. I know what that means in Waimakariri. We have a range of employers who are just crying out for more staff. So it really concerns me when we do have a disconnect between those who are seeking employment and employers who are seeking staff. Because I think what we don't want is anyone in a predicament where they're just growing their personal debt, because let's be honest, we know they're not going to clear that debt, and all that is happening is putting them into a circular position that them and anyone else in their family is going to be greatly affected by. So not only for us is it about getting them into work, but getting people skilled up and potentially an education of that's the way forward for them. So if I think about my spokes role in mental health, we know there's an increasing number of people who report mental health as their primary obstacle to employment. There's a program in New Zealand now called Individual Placement Support, where they can work with people individually who have mental health issues to get them back into employment. So we would like to see programs like that that are evidence-based, and it gets people back up on their feet again, because I think your original point is that having an increasing amount of debt that realistically you'll be paying a fraction off every week is not good for anyone.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Matt. And thank you for that question, Iona. Cool. How are we feeling? How are we doing? Doing okay? It's pretty, I just got to take my hat off to all our rangatahi with your very well thought out questions. And a mihi to our MPs for their whakaaro, for their wisdom, their thoughts behind and their answers to those questions. Alrighty, we'll keep it moving and we'll go to our next young person, Quilla.
Kia ora. My question is for Karen and Ricardo. Teen suicide has been a major issue in Aotearoa for a really long time, and improvements are not being made fast enough. What tangible actions would your party take to reduce teen suicide?
Awesome. Let's start off with Ricardo and then we'll go to Karen.
Yeah, and just very mindful of the sort of sensitive nature of the session, and just want to, send my aroha to survivors and family members as well, who may have lost someone to suicide. I think, thinking of the fact that it's Pride Month overseas at least, and I'm thinking of our trans, takatapui, non-binary communities, and the fact that we know that mental health or ill mental health is really prevalent amongst our rainbow communities. And the big feedback that we've received from our rainbow youth has been the need for access to adequate services, adequate healthcare, including gender affirming healthcare, that we forget that is about saving lives. And so for us, it's about putting in that framework in our health services that acknowledges the need of our youth, including our rainbow youth. And Elizabeth Kerekere fought really hard and during the stages of the Paiora bill to sort of entrench sort of language around the needs of takatapui and there. And so I think that's one area that we could make a really tangible difference. I think we can't also ignore the determinants of mental health and the things that sort of keep people well and in a space that is healthy. And so I think that stuff around incomes and housing actually is also about improving the mental well-being of our communities. So we can also do things around ensuring that we have adequate and proper access for our homeless youth when it comes to the services around transitional and emergency housing. We could also be improving the well-being of our youth around even addressing the fact that the youth payment is lower than main benefits, and that has a direct implications on the mental well-being of people. So I think it's about adequate access to healthcare, as well as addressing those determinants, and I'm hearing the bell, so I'm going to stop there.
Awesome. Ngā mihi, Ricardo, thank you for your whakaaro there. And we will now pass it over to Karen.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you for this question, because unless we talk about these topics, we're never going to create real change. And there's a lot of young people that are suffering silently. And by asking that question, you're bringing it out into the open and we're able to have a conversation. So I really appreciate that. I've suffered as a young person growing up through the system, and I know what it's like when you're screaming out for help and there's nothing there. So this is very personal to me. And I believe we need a complete overhaul of the mental health system in New Zealand. We spend around $2 billion a year on mental health, and nothing seems to be changing. ACT has a policy where we're creating a new separate commission just for mental health and addiction services. And that would be where people would go to be assessed with what kind of help they're looking for, what kind of help they need. And it doesn't matter where you live in New Zealand, it won't be a lottery system anymore. You'll be able to have choices about where you go and the help you can get. Because we can talk about putting counsellors in schools, we can talk about sending you to specific places, but unless the youth is comfortable with who they're speaking to and have consistent help and create a bond with the person that's helping them, I feel it can kind of create more harm than good. I have a lot of young people around me that go to the services that are available now, and they're not consistent. You're only given a couple of sessions and then you moved on to a new person. And I believe we really need to put more effort into this area. So I think the Mental Health and Addiction New Zealand is what we would call this service. And we would make sure that the providers are actually doing what they say they're doing, or else they won't get the funding anymore and will go to an organisation that is achieving the outcomes that are needed for our young people.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Karen, and thank you for that, Ricardo. Just such a hearty question, Quilla, so thank you for asking that. And again, just want to acknowledge, just as Ricardo had said earlier, all of us who have been affected by youth suicide. It's a, and teen suicide, it's a big topic. So yeah, just want to acknowledge everyone in that, and thank you, Quilla, for that question. All right, man, our chat is blowing up with comments and questions. So this is definitely something that people are engaging with. So again, just want to mihi out to everyone, our rangatahi panelists and our MP panelists as well, because this is great. Alrighty, we're going to move to our last partai, our last question for this round, and I'll hand it over to you, Ella.
My question is for Arena and Matt. 50% of us menstruate and have to pay for period products. Wouldn't it be fair if this was free for all?
Cool question. It's a great question because this is something that I'm really passionate about. I totally agree with you that, under the old system, when period products could cost you, I don't know, 10, 15 bucks a week, it might not sound like heaps, but it is absolutely a barrier for some people. We know that 95,000 9 to 18-year-olds were missing things like school because they're on their period and they didn't want to be somewhere where they didn't have the right access to menstrual products. And that's why the government is now funding those products and is rolling them out through schools. That rollout's happening right at the moment. And it's really good to see that more schools and kura around the country are getting free period products right now. And I think, that is a program which I look at and I say, this is about removing barriers to people's education. This isn't about something that's a nice to have. This is an absolute must. And the way that we've looked upon period products before has been really gendered. And it's really good to look at this and say, actually, this was holding girls, women, people who have ovaries back from their performance in education. And that holds us back from being able to reach our potential and work in further education. Love the question. I think, when you look at this, I think it's 1,680 schools that have opted into this free access program that the government now has. There's more work that we can do, and there's more work for all of you to do. And if you know schools who aren't taking up the opportunity, you need to be raising this with your school boards, with your school reps, with your prefects, with the parents who are involved. This is an issue which affects everyone. The government is funding it, but people, I think, feel squeamish about talking about these issues and about making them available, whether it's in bathrooms, whether it's in common areas. So it's so good to be able to discuss this issue out in the open. It's something that, as you say, 50% of people experience. Just want to mihi to you for that, but there's more work to be done on this.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Arena. We'll hand it over to Matt.
Oh, thank you. And look, hey, great question. And something I'm very impressed with young people about is the questions that you want to put out there, the vocabulary that you have to talk about a range of issues that my generation or older generations would have not gone there. And I think well done to Lydia Coe, who said quite publicly not that long ago she had a bad golfing game because of her period. And that was good to have that open conversation, and well done, Ella, for asking this question, because I think, to Arena's point, we do need to talk about it. I know your predecessor, Louisa Wall, as well, did a lot of work around making period products more accessible, and I do acknowledge the role the government's playing in rolling out period products within the school scheme as well. I think it's very important that we want our young people to engage in as many things as they can, especially in education. And the stats that you see that the lack of period products might be preventing young women from going to school on a daily basis, I think is hugely concerning. And I acknowledge the government for moving swiftly to address that. For me, I've also visited some of the commercial solutions as well. And what I say that for is because I visited my local warehouse that is making very cheap and accessible, I think, $1 period products. Now, I don't want to give them a big boost because I'm sure there's probably other shops and supermarkets and businesses that are doing that as well. But it just shows you that it's not only a government approach, it should be about the community as well. And I think the private sector has a role in it. But just coming back to my original point, it's great that we're having this conversation and people can feel more included.
Awesome. Man, massive mihi to you, Arena and Matt, for your whakaaro. And Ella, thank you for that question. Man, it is just to echo the sentiments that have already been shared. It's so important that we start talking about these things that are affecting half of the population of the world. So yeah, thank you, Ella. Awesome. So we have just concluded round one and done. That is us. So e te whānau who are watching, our audience, if you can please give our panelists some aroha, some love, some reactions, just because it's been really good. It's been really, really good. So thank you to our panelists for your for your courage and your wisdom, your articulation. Is that a word? I don't know. So yeah, cool. Just another word to our audience out there. Our third round, we will be selecting some questions. So if you want to chuck your questions in, now just want to put it out there, I'm not actually moderating the questions, so don't get angry at me if your question doesn't get chosen, okay? I'm just the MC, okay? So aroha mai. And we're here for a good time, not a long time, so we won't be able to get through all of your questions, but the awesome powers that be that are behind the scenes, they'll select some questions to be presented to our members of parliament. So that is in round 3, but we are still only up to round 2. So the way this section works, we are going to be doing a quick fire questions. So yes, no answers, please, MPs. So quite literally, yes or no. Kia ora, easy. And we will be firing it through. We'll have our first question from one of our rangatahi panelists, and then we'll go through, I'll sort of direct who gets the answer in terms of the MPs, and then we'll move to our second question. You'll all get a chance to answer, then our third and fourth until we're done. Cool? Awesome. So you're one there. If you're one there, wow. You can tell I am a Pacific Islander when I look at the name Iona and say you're one there. Aloha mai Iona. If you want to start us off with your question, please.
So following Golrez Garaman's members' bill being pulled from the biscuit tin and the Make It 16 campaign being really prevalent in the media recently, it looks like the electoral system may have a lot of changes coming up. Does your party support lowering the voting age to 16?
Great question. Karen, we'll start with you. Yes or no?
No.
Kia ora. Ricardo.
Yes.
And Arena?
Oh, I can't speak for the whole party.
Yes or no?
It would never be something that the whole party entered into a discussion on, because but look, I support 16-year-olds being able to exercise their democratic rights.
So that's a yes. Okay, we'll you make do of that what you will, Etefano. And Matt.
I'm not sure my party has a position, but my position would be no.
Kia ora. All right. We'll move to our next question. Josiah. Okay, maybe we'll skip Josiah because maybe something's happening there. We'll come back to Josiah. We'll go to Quilla.
Would you support compulsory education about sexual consent in schools?
Cool, awesome. Karen.
I would say yes, but it depends on the age.
Okay, yes. Remember, panelists, it's a yes or no section. So, Quilla, can you just repeat that question one more time, please?
Would you support compulsory education about sexual consent in schools?
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Ricardo.
Yes.
Kia ora. Arena.
Yes.
Kia ora.
But I wish we could come back to this and discuss it. Can't we? There's so much to this question. It's a great one.
This is true. Matt.
Consent education, yes. Compulsory, no.
Guys, yes or no? You can't do yes and no. Okay, cool. We will go to Ella. your question, please.
Currently, there is very little representation of the LGBTQ+ community in the NZ curriculum. Does your party support increasing this representation and visibility in the curriculum?
Kia ora. Okay, we'll start again from the top. Karen.
Well, that's not actually something I've discussed with my party, so maybe.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty there. Kia ora. Man, I'm such a soft mediator. I'm supposed to be hardline, yes or no? And I'm like, oh, honesty, that's good. Love that. Okay, Ricardo.
Yep, absolutely.
Kia ora. Arina.
Yes.
Kia ora. And Matt.
Personal view, yes.
Kia ora. Awesome. We will try and shoot back to Josiah. Josiah, are you there?
He's not on the panelist screen, so I feel like he may have dropped off.
Okay, all good. We will, oh, he's dropped out. Well, that's annoying. Okay, well, we are adaptable and we keep it moving. So thank you for that quick fire, extra quick fire round. We're missing a question. Actually, I'm just wondering to the powers that be, because we're doing pretty good for time. The powers that be, do you have a question that you could pull out that could be a question we could add right now and you can fire it to me? Oh, put on the spot, put on the spot. Surely we've got a question.
Perhaps we could discuss the consent education question, which is a great one. I'll go first.
Well, okay, why not?
Let me tell you, there's no compulsory subjects in New Zealand, right? Every school, for really good reason, gets to choose what's taught and gets to find the teachers with passions for those subjects. My schools are going to be teaching something different in Manariwa than Matt's schools down in Waimakariri, and that's great. We support that. Consent education in New Zealand has always been, though, dependent on what kind of NGOs and community organisations have been available to teach that in schools. This is the first time where we currently have a minister, Jan Tameri, who is looking at how we roll out and make accessible to all schools programs for consent education, because we recognise that that's so important, that kids need to be able, teenagers need to be able to understand the basics of consent. There's really good ways, you know, as a mum of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, there's great ways that you can teach the language of consent to very young children. It doesn't have to be about sex. It can be about respecting boundaries of other people, respecting your own boundaries, learning about your body, being okay to talk about things like your body and how you feel when people cross your boundaries. All of those things are really good things to learn in school. And I think older kids as well have a great opportunity to understand some of those boundaries before they're put in risky situations and they don't know how to deal with them. I never got consent education at school. I wish that was something we had talked about, because, you know, it's something that I've learned as an adult on the fly. I wish that as a young person, I was able to talk to that with adults that I trusted in a school environment, as well as my peers who were learning it at the same time.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Arina. Karen, I see you've taken your microphone off mute.
Yeah, I think this is a very important topic too, and I'm glad that we can get a second to discuss it. I mean, I've got 4 children myself, 2 girls, 2 boys, and I think it's important for both boys and girls to understand the boundaries of how they behave around each other. Because I know it's not just girls that feel pressured sometimes, it can also be boys that feel pressured. And we have to understand that we are entitled to express ourselves and entitled to say no, and entitled to let people know you're not comfortable with a situation, and be okay within yourself to say that and have the strength to stand up for what you are feeling at the time. And I want to make sure that my boys treat women with respect, and I want to make sure my girls treat themselves with respect they deserve, but also treat their male counterparts with respect. So I think it goes both ways, and I think it's a very important topic for young people to speak about.
Yes, kia ora. Thank you for that, Karen. And yes, I completely agree with that, whakaaro, that it's important regardless of what, how we might identify in terms of our gender. That's awesome. Thank you. We'll go to Matt and then Ricardo.
Thank you. And I just want to agree with my colleagues who have spoken already, so I won't traverse the same ground as them. But something I wanted to add is just for the young leaders who are on the Zoom tonight, I think there's some thinking about process, about how you get schools to understand more about the need for consent education. And if I can just give a brief example, you know, a lot of people say, what's it about today where we have so many mental health issues? And I think for someone who's worked in the field and had a good look at it, I'm not sure we do. And what I mean by that is, are you telling me after the Second World War, the returning servicemen and women, there wasn't a high rate of mental distress in the community? Of course there was. It was locked up behind closed doors. There was a lot of domestic violence, alcohol abuse. But the reason it was locked up was because the generation of my generation or older never were able to talk about mental health. There was always fearful you might be locked up into an asylum. So the point I'm making now is your generation is one of the first generations that can talk about mental health so openly. You've got a vocabulary to talk about that we never had. You're more open to talking about your mental health needs. So if you apply that analogy I've just used to around consent, you are one of the first generations who are actually saying, we've got a vocabulary to talk about it. We want to be more open about it. And I think there is a task there for you, how you get older generations who are probably in positions in schools that decide these things, about how you bring them on board, that they're not fearful of what the discussion is going to be about.
Kia ora. Thanks for that, Matt. And Ricardo, do you have any closing statement?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with my colleagues. And I think just to add, I think the design of any curriculum that would include, you know, consent, I think needs to be designed alongside a diverse range of communities, because I think equally we do want to ensure that, like, I think these conversations happen in contexts that may be quite different based on like culture, for example, and we do want to ensure that yeah, the design of such curriculum would be competent, because the worst thing that we want is to sort of entrench quite, yeah, like Anglo-Saxon, like kind of Western-centric views of these issues. So that would be the only thing I would be adding onto the need to develop something in the curriculum.
Awesome. Ngā mihi to our panelists there. Thank you for being adaptable, and Arena, thanks for kicking the ball off there. Yes, Iona.
I've just got Josiah's question here.
He's actually back.
Oh, he's
Iona.
back. Awesome.
Yes. So Josiah, would you like to do your yes/no question, and we'll work through our MP panelists?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to apologize to everyone. Kind of having some issues here. But my question is, benefits and wages are so low families can barely survive. If your party were to be in power, will your party lift the wage and benefits payments?
Good question. We'll start off with Karen. Yes or no? We're now, so hang on. It's a yes or no answer e te iwi. So we'll go to Karen, please.
Yeah, no.
No, kia ora. Ricardo?
Yes, much further than they're right now.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Ricardo. Arena?
Yes, and we have significantly.
Kia ora. And Matt?
Yes.
Kia ora. Awesome. Josiah, it's great to have you back. Thank you for that partai, for that question. And thank you to our panelists for their answers. Well, e te iwi, that is us for round 2, the quick fire / not so quick, because we had a chance to breathe, and which was great, and answer a question, a bonus question, if you will. We're now going to go into round 3, which is questions from the audience. So these are 4 questions, and 2 MPs will be chosen per question, and each MP will have 2 minutes to answer. For this section, I'm going to hand it over to Juanita.
Kia ora. So the first question comes from me and is for Arina and Matt. So UNICEF describes New Zealand as one of the worst countries in the world for child abuse, and childmatters.org.nz shows that the stats 1 in 5 children experience sexual abuse. This is a serious problem that I feel isn't adequately addressed in youth-facing charities or even schools. What will the government do to enforce a baseline of safeguarding measures in child-facing organisations such as schools?
Right, we're going to pass that on to two MPs, where they'll have 2 minutes each to answer that question. So let's go over to Ricardo.
Oh, wait, sorry. I thought the question was very specific for the two of it, but happy to answer it. I was just, yeah, I may have lost track because I heard it was for the other MP. So would you mind just repeating the question so that I can collect my thoughts and properly address it?
Yeah, so
Sure.
before you repeat the question, Juanita, we'll go to you, Ricardo, and then Karen. So just to tee you up so you feel a bit prepared that the question's coming for you. So over to Juanita.
UNICEF describes New Zealand as one of the worst countries in the world for sexual abuse, and childmatters.org.nz stats show that 1 in 5 children experience sexual abuse. This is a serious problem that I feel isn't adequately addressed in youth-facing charities or even schools. What will the government do to enforce a baseline of safeguarding measures in child-facing organisations such as schools?
A really important question, and I think in terms of like what the government should be doing, I think like centering the voices of survivors, I think would be something really important. And I think we need to see far more in our government agencies. I mean, just more broadly in terms of any reforms that may be occurring. In terms of safeguarding and protections, I think adequately staffing, I think, and resourcing like the work that our social workers are doing, for example, so that they can work closely with families is really important, because that is a sector that is really, really overstretched. So I think there's more that we can do in terms of resourcing and just, you know, any legislation that government passes, like having the voice of people at the center, because that is something that has been really concerning with some of the OT related legislation going through the House that hasn't centered our youth.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Ricardo. And now we'll hand it over to you, Karen, for your comments.
Yes, another really good question. There are a lot of children that are once again suffering silently, not knowing who they can talk to, and not knowing where to turn. And I think there's a lot of issues in this country when it comes to abuse within the home and abuse within care system itself. And we've got a long way to go. And a lot of that is about listening to our youth and hearing our youth's voices. As a survivor of this myself, I understand the barriers that are there, and finding somebody that you can trust with your story or with your experiences, and knowing that they are actually going to act on it and are actually going to support you through the process. And I think counsellors in schools is a good start, but making sure that the counsellors in schools are actually trauma specialised and understand how to deal with a youth that is going through that at the time. And I also think we need to be encouraging more trauma specialised staff within OT and within our social services. And we just don't have enough people with those qualifications in the industry at the moment. And I think that's something we really need to work on.
Awesome. Thank you both for your comments there, and thank you, Juanita, for that question. Yes. So Juanita, we'll head over to the next question that you've received.
Sweet. So this one's from Nate from Nelson. Our oceans are the #1 producer of oxygen, so protecting and restoring them is vital. We know that trawling, more specifically bottom trawling, is doing a huge damage to these places, recklessly destroying these ecosystems for practices that aren't even necessary. What is the government doing about this? Can we phase out trawling?
Awesome. And we'll start with Matt, and then we'll go to Ricardo.
Thank you for that question, and I suppose we're all acutely aware and intimately connected to our oceans, living in a country like New Zealand. And I think in a country like New Zealand, where we are a small trading nation at the bottom of the world that needs to trade with the rest of the world to have a high standard of living, we need to ensure that we have good products for market. On saying that, we need to ensure that our products are sustainable and that we can ensure good management practices no matter what sector we have. And what's interesting when you look at our markets now, our consumers are wanting to make sure that when they look at that supply chain, that their products are farmed or fished in a sustainable manner. And I think when you look at parts of our fisheries and our oceans around New Zealand, I think there has been times when things have been overfished. I think there's also a real concern about foreign boats coming into New Zealand waters as well. And I think what we need is a good regulatory regime that ensures that the sector is looking after itself. And to your point about bottom trawling, there is no point if we overfish and we are not able to have a sustainable market going forward.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Matt. Ricardo.
Yeah, kia ora. I think just acknowledging that the well-being of our ecosystems is basically the well-being of people, and it's all just so connected, right? And so I think the current destruction of our seamounts and our marine ecosystems, like if we don't address that like urgently, it will take generations to recover, and it will have deep impacts into our food systems and our health. I think it's important to note that the government does have the legal tools at the moment to ban bottom trawling on seamounts. And this is something the Green Party is actively pushing government to act upon. Basically, we know that Minister Parking has established a forum right now to manage the effects of bottom trawling in New Zealand, but I think we need to go further, right? It's like, it's not just enough to kind of monitor the impacts on such a destructive practice. And if we are supporting much more sustainable ways of basically growing and providing kai to our communities that are not so damaging, I think we don't have to then awkwardly choose between feeding our communities and protecting our environment. I think those things are not mutually exclusive. So yes, we would be supporting a ban on bottom trawling and just more funding for sustainable forms of collecting kai and distributing it to our communities.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Matt and Ricardo. Juanita, your next question, please.
Cool. This one's from Sapphire from Otautahi. Sorry, English is hard at the moment. There appears to be an increasing need for mental health support within our communities. What is being done to ensure that there is enough support services, including long-term counselling, available for those who require it?
Awesome. So that question, just because we haven't heard from Arena in a bit, so we'll put that to Arena and Karen. So let's start with Arena.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And thank you, Juanita. I know you had me and Matt in mind in that first question. I'm happy to talk to you about it offline. But in terms of this one, mental health and well-being for whether it's young people or for anyone in the community has been a huge priority for this government. And it's also about supporting resilience of kids as part of growing up well in New Zealand. There are programs which I'm really passionate about, which are being rolled out now as part of the Access and Choice program. That's what the government calls its big initiative in investing into mental health, which is going on in the community now. It resources things like primary mental health care at GPs. So this is for people who want to access mental health services through their GP. They'll be funded for those sessions. It's really important that people are able to access those cost effectively and within their local communities. I think of someone like my mum, who's been a GP in South Auckland, one of the first Māori doctors for 35 years now, and the relationships that she has with families over 4 or 5 generations now, being able to access mental health services through someone like that who you have a trusting relationship with locally is really important. But then there's also the Mana Ake program. It's one of my absolute favorite things that we're doing in rolling out services in schools, where schools will be resourced for someone to be in the school that is a trusted person for kids going through things like parental separation, going through things like anxiety and stress and emotional trauma, all of those things that kids bring with them to school through the gate and stop them from being able to learn and take opportunities at school. That's what's being resourced now. It's a little bit different to some of the schools in your area might have counsellors that are funded for kids or for parents to manage those situations. This ensures that everyone is able to have access to those services and that they bring a mental health and wellbeing perspective at all times. But I think, this is a really big issue, and I don't want to come here and say that there's not more that we need to do, and more especially for leaders in the community to do. I mean, having the conversations around talking about these mental health issues, as my colleague Matt Doosley has said, is a huge part of it. We need to be able to have the tools to have those discussions. So programs like Mana Ake, which mean that kids are able to talk about these things with someone they trust, get those skills to be able to talk about these issues, and then the GP at primary care to be able to support you to continue to seek help locally. We're creating a sort of pipeline for people to tap in to people that they trust, to people that they can discuss this with at all points along the journey. And it's about catching those issues before they become huge, groundbreaking issues. I think we're doing some good work in this area.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Arena. And we'll pass it over to you, Karen.
Okay, so I talked a little bit about mental health before with one of the other questions, and I talked about having a mental health and addiction service, but it wouldn't be like a provider of services. It would be a commissioning agency that would assess the individual needs of the person and then find the provider that would suit the person the best. Because I think it's about choice. I think it's about putting the people at the heart of the system. So not making the person work around the system, but making the system work around the person and their actual needs. And I think what we've got at the moment isn't working because youth and adults actually need to feel comfortable with the provider they're with, and they need to know that if the provider's not working or if it's not providing the service that they need, that they can go elsewhere and not feel like if they say no to one thing that they're not going to get the help they need. I really think we need to put the people at the centre of this, and we need to be making sure that the money is actually going where it's needed and targeted where it is needed, because right now with the $2 billion we're spending, we don't seem to be seeing any change, and we don't seem to be seeing any improvements.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Karen and Arena. Appreciate your whakaaro with that question. I'm going to ask a question here. Hang on, let me just check something real quick. Yeah, so this is a question that's come in, and I'm particularly invested in this in this question and the answering of this question. And I'd just like to direct this to Karen and Ricardo. So we'll start off with you, Ricardo, and then we'll go to you, Karen. But here's the question. How can we ensure that our most vulnerable children who are under the care of oranga tamariki are looked after well and eventually placed in loving, caring homes? Cool. So that's for you, Karen, and for you, Ricardo. And I can't recall who I said first. So Ricardo, we'll go with you and then we'll jump over to Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had just so many people, including young people, give feedback to us around this issue. And I think one of the most substantive things that as Parliament and as government we could be doing is taking heed on For example, even how we ensure that OT actually does its job and proper. And so when it comes to, for example, the process we've just been going through around the oversight of rangatahi, and the sort of changes around the checks to ensure that there is proper oversight, and that if there are failures, that like we got kind of proper independent monitoring. Like I think this is where we could be doing a better job listening to people, and young people in particular, who have been really clear that actually what we are doing right now will not result in proper independent monitoring. I think that's such an important role to address the harm that OT has caused across generations, that like we have really strong independent monitoring of the agency. Beyond that, I think we could be doing far more in terms of supporting. So like, I think there's far more work that we can do to address harm that may be occurring before people are put into state care. I think making sure that we tap into those support systems that exist within the broader community is really essential. And that looks like addressing those determinants. So I think better oversight, listening to young people, and also addressing the harm before people are put into state care.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Ricardo. Karen, your thoughts on
that? I'm really passionate about this, because this is the reason I came to Parliament, out of frustration that our child protection services in this country has been pretty poor, and there's no accountability for the organisation when it fails our children, and fails our children badly. We seem to just ignore our children's voices. We make decisions around our kids without actually involving them in the decision making when it's their future we're discussing. And I feel that a lot of these procedures we put in place, like FGCs and the social workers that are assigned to you, children don't have a voice, they don't have a say, and decisions are being made about them, but nobody seems to talk to them. And I think we need to start listening to our youth more, and start actually saying, hey, you know what, you say you don't feel safe in this situation, we're going to listen to you and we're going to make sure you are safe. And if you're not safe, we will move you right now to a safer place. But I feel everybody's talking around you and nobody's talking to you, and nobody's listening to you. And that's part of the problem. There's no accountability at the top when mistakes are made. The organisation's too busy trying to cover themselves, rather than putting the best interests of our children at the forefront of every decision they're making. And it makes me very, very angry when we have children that are screaming out to be heard and we're still not listening. And so my goal in Parliament is to make sure that you're not a statistic, you're a person, you're a child that needs to be heard, and that's my goal.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Karen. I felt your words. In Tongan, we call that mawhana. That made mawhana kia loto. So thank you for your comments there. Yes, so this has been a really good section thus far. E te iwi, all of us who are watching and listening, can we please show our panelists some aroha, some alofa, some ofa, some love, with some reactions of some kind. Man, we're feeling the heart, and some really thought-provoking comments and questions being brought to the space. So again, ngā mihi to you all for your whakaaro and your kōrero, for your words, your questions. It's been incredible, so thank you. Well, e te iwi, we are coming to a close for our evening. What? Already? I hear you say. We are going to wrap things up with some closing remarks, but I just want to say, obviously we haven't had time to answer all the questions from the audience. So, you know, if you have any questions that weren't answered, you can direct them to an MP. You can direct your questions to your MP directly wow, my English. You can directly message them your questions. That would be cool. All right, let me just check. Oh yeah, okay. So actually, before we go into the final wrap up, we've got one more question, one last little question, and it's a good question, as have all the other questions been. So this question has come from Katie. Let me bring this up. So Katie is 16 years old from Hastings, and this is her partai. There seems to be a lack of understanding around caring for young people with disorders that cause brain injuries, such as fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. What will your party do to improve supportive care for and outcomes of young people living with FASD or other brain disabilities living in state care? So we'll pass that question to Matt and Arina. So we'll start off with you, Matt, and then we'll go to Arina.
Oh, thank you for that question. Just if I can just dovetail back just about the following up from MPs, I was just going to say, for the young people, if you look at the names, hopefully it's the same with my colleagues on the Zoom tonight, and the email address format's always the same. For me, it would be matt.ducey@parliament.govt.nz, and you could apply the same email address to the others, my parliamentary colleagues. So I'm sure they'll agree. We're more than happy to receive any emails and follow up any questions. I think that's a very important question about FASD. I think some of the work I've looked at it, there's a real lack of the ability for an assessment, and of course quite often that assessment would need to go private, and that is a barrier to a huge amount of people and families as well. And not only that, I think any government yet has really grappled with what entitlement someone will receive once they've been assessed with FASD. So I think it's an area that does need further work on. It's an area that I think has now become a bit more high profile when you look at some of the people who have faced wrongful convictions and ended up in prison for a long amount of time. So it's an area we're learning more about. And I think whether it be for SAD or if you want to look at my case, my issues were caused by a head injury when I was young. We know trauma to the brain affects a lot of people in very different ways, and we do know a lot of those people end up needing further specialist services. So the first thing I'd say is we actually probably need to get a good standardized assessment in place through public health services or social services, and then we need to understand what is going to be the best wraparound support for someone with that condition to ensure that they can engage in education, in employment, in housing, and to actually just engage in being a productive member of the community.
Well done. Thank you for that, Matt. I will hand it over to you, Arina.
Thank you for this awesome question. It's a huge one, and it is a challenge, I think, for our generation of political leaders. I say that as an old 33-year-old, but look, my colleague Matt Ducey is correct that we haven't been able to deal with this well, and there is so much more work to do. On the question of traumatic brain injuries, this is something that really affects me. It affects someone in my family, and is a cause of so many behaviours that we don't understand the science behind now, let alone how we respond from a policy setting. But what we do know is that so many people in prison, by the time they get to that point in the justice system, have had some form of traumatic brain injury that makes them act in an irrational and violent way, or suffer from something like FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome, where their judgment is really different from other people's and they behave again in an erratic way, especially when they have some other kind of substances in the mix. Manariwa is the country's capital of prisons. It's not an honour that any local MP wants. There's Wiri Men's, Auckland Women's, Whakataka Pōkai and Korowai Manaki, so 2 youth prisons. And I talk about those because when you think about the 2 youth facilities in Manariwa, you might think of those as big places. They're actually really not. There are only 11, 12 people in one of those in say Whakataka Pōkai at any given time. By the time you get to that point in the justice system as a young person, there are things in your life which have gone wrong and compounded and compounded and compounded since your childhood. And often these kids, more often than not, like it would be rare if not, have something like a traumatic brain injury or FASD. And I think we have to really look at the drivers of that. It's made me a very passionate advocate for more stringent alcohol regulation. And just last night, was it the night before, in Parliament, I gave a speech on why I think our alcohol laws need to change, because they are impacting on our communities in ways that we don't regulate for. Those harms from alcohol are passed on to kids, whether it's through family violence, whether it's through damage that happens within the womb to children who didn't choose it. That's a harm that's done to them. And I think we should look at, our drinking culture in New Zealand and say, we can do more for people who are harmed by drinking as secondary recipients of that. They're not the ones drinking, but they bear the harm and the cost. We also know that Māori women are the most likely group in our society to suffer from the secondary harms of alcohol, whether it's through domestic harm, family harm, or as passengers, as pedestrians, as drivers in road accidents. We know that Māori communities in South Auckland are the most likely to have alcohol in the mix, driving offending, and they're more likely to be charged when they have some sort of substance in the mix. That's why I think, this is a broader conversation.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk about it more, but I'm not allowed.
Yeah. No, kia ora, thank you for that, Arena. And I think, again, it's awesome to hear our panelists and the various topics that they are passionate about. So e te iwi, for those of us who are watching and listening, please feel free to get in contact with our panelists, especially if you're wanting to hear more or kōrero further about those topics that are close to you, because you can hear it's close to them as well. So I just want to encourage that. I am aware of our time, and we're initially well ahead of time, and now we are slightly behind, but kei te pai, all good. We will keep that moving. We have actually come to the end of our time together, and we are going to wrap things up. So what we're going to do now in terms of a final word from our panelists is we'll start off with our MPs, and they will have a minute, please. Just a minute, because our time is, we are a bit behind schedule now. So if you could, we'll have a minute for each of our MPs, and then after that, we'll go to our rangatahi for their final comments in just a minute there as well. So we will start with Karen to start us off. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you again for the invitation to speak on this panel. I think it's very important that our youth get an opportunity to express themselves and ask the hard questions. But I also feel very proud of the fact that our youth are feeling strong enough to ask some of these tough questions. And anybody who is struggling with anything we've discussed today, please reach out for help, or reach out to a friend and have a chat and make sure that you're feeling okay, because I know they've been quite tough topics. And please send me an email if you've got any questions, and join in with the select committee processes when there's bills up to do with young people, because we do value your voice. And I know Ricardo and I are both on the social services select committee, and we're making a huge effort to make it easier to take away some of the barriers for youth to come to Parliament and speak to politicians. and express yourselves so that we understand what you're feeling.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Karen. We'll now head over to Ricardo for his 1 minute wrap-up final comments from our panel. Kia ora.
Yeah, big mihi to you, Dietrich, for facilitating and keeping us on time, to the panelists for your great questions, and to attendees for, just being present and following the comments in the chat, and they've been great. Just want to sort of acknowledge that I think there's just so much more work that as a parliament we can be doing to genuinely not just sort of pay lip service to, and kind of just acknowledge that you have a voice and that you're presenting, that I think, we have to then, when you present to us, like on our select committees, like Karen was saying, to actually like listen and to make space for you to be the drivers of change. Like the decisions that we're making right now, like you're going to be the generation most impacted by it, more than any of us who are here in Parliament. So I think we need to, really actively take those issues into account, and, really keen to continue working alongside many of you for issues around justice, climate, and economic. And look forward to being complicit and collaborating with you for some genuine transformative change. Yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, Ricardo. Arina, we'll go to you, please, for your 60 seconds.
No, kia ora. I just reflecting on how much we've discussed tonight, and it really speaks to me about how our planet right now is facing some pretty incredible challenges, whether it's the global pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's those social justice issues that we've talked about tonight. And yet, globally, we see that we need leaders who can listen to those issues and who can represent the diversity of views around the world and the people that they're elected to serve. I think if we look at our parliament, we couldn't say that it represents young people in the way that it should. And if we look at our political institutions and young people's trusts in political institutions, we need to say, are young people being welcomed at the table? Are young people getting the opportunity they need to really make decisions? And I'm looking to you to keep doing what you're doing, to keep leading these kinds of discussions, but also to encourage other people around you to join your movement. That's the way we build power around young people's issues. That is how we make long-term change around those long-term issues, which we really need to. And young people deserve a say in these things. Kia ora.
Kia ora. And finally, Matt, for your comments.
Well, firstly, thank you for the invite to be here at the Youth Hot Seat panel, to you, Dietrich, for emceeing, for all the sponsors, and for the young people in front of me on the screen tonight. I think it's really important we have these Zooms. Hopefully for some of you who mightn't have seen much of a Member of Parliament or asked questions of, that we've come across fairly normal, and we are normal people of the community. But what I just want to say is a huge congratulations to your generation. I think there's huge opportunities ahead of you. If I think about my spokes role, I'm National's first mental health spokesperson. If I was a Member of Parliament 10 years ago, I guarantee you we would not be having the conversations about issues like mental health that we are in Parliament now. And that's primarily down to your generation. You're driving these issues forward. You've got vocabulary to talk about issues that other generations never had, and you're really going for it. So well done, and keep our feet to the fire.
Kia ora. Thank you, Matt. Now we'll just go to our awesome panel of rangatahi for their closing remarks, and just the same, just 60 seconds, please. E te rangatira. So Quilla, we'll start with you, please, for your closing remarks.
I really enjoyed having the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I know my first question was around a difficult topic, so thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. I'm also very glad you're all happy to get thinking about sexual consent education, as I personally think it's a really important issue. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Quilla. Ella, if we could head to you.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's my first time dipping into politics, and it was really fun. I'm excited to see the working on period poverty and representation of LGBTQ+.
Kia ora. Thank you, Ella. Josiah.
Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'd like to thank those that are behind the scenes right now that you don't see their faces, that were really involved with bringing all of us here right now. I'd like to thank all the MPs. I'd like to thank Dietrich, but I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists. I'd like to thank Ella, Iona, Quilla, and of course, Juanita. It's great to have you on board. It's been really great to hear all of the things that you agree with us as, it's good to hear that you can agree with some things, you can disagree with some things, but, at the end of the day, we all come to one point together. So, I thank you all for being here. I thank you, everyone that's watching. It's get really heated sometimes up in here. I'm getting quite hot sitting right here, and I'm not even the one answering the questions. So, can't wait to see you guys again.
My Lord, thank you, Josiah. And we'll go to Iona.
Kia ora. I'd just like to say thank you to all the other panelists, and I've really enjoyed hearing from the wide variety of parties here tonight, especially voices that I might not typically be hearing, especially like in my sort of social media echo chamber, perhaps. It's been great to hear from everyone, and I have a lot to think about following tonight. So thank you so much. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Iona. And Juanita.
Kia ora. Just want to say again, thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to all the people that have tuned in to listen. Thank you to all the other panelists on here tonight. And thank you for allowing me to ask questions that I am passionate about and get answers. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Juanita. Again, thank you to all our incredible panelists. Can we please show our panelists some aroha, some alofa, some ofa, aroa? Awesome. Now, I just want to say again, I think someone already mentioned it. Maybe it was Ricardo. The comment section in the chat is fire. There's some incredible questions, comments. So I encourage us to have a look at that because it's well worth the read. It's been an awesome evening thus far at the iwi, and we are coming to a close. Yes, so I'm going to do our closing karakia, and then that'll be us for the evening. All right, so before I do the karakia, I just want to say this real quick, just a random tidbit that just sort of popped in my head. Oftentimes we can find ourselves around sort of comments like, oh, I'm not really into politics. Well, actually, the truth is everything's political. Sorry to say. So rangatahi who are out there who are like, oh, politics, what's this? I'd encourage you to get into it and to get thinking about it. Yeah. Anyway, I'll do the karakia and then that'll be us. I noi tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake. Amine. Awesome, te iwi. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for being with us. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here. Again, thank you to our incredible panelists. Be safe, be kind, and much love. Peace.